Welcome back to the pod. I'm your co host here, Gabriel, and today we're talking with Karen Lee, an author, award winning plant based nutritionist, recipe developer, speaker, and educator. Well, Karen, I know we were talking before the show about, different kind of like entry points into the plant based, into the vegan world. I guess real quick, how did you initially become fully plant based?
Hi, Gabrielle. Well, it's quite a convoluted story. So, we're talking about 2009. I found out that I had some food intolerances. So I was intolerant to both dairy and to yeast,
Mm.
and it basically meant that my favorite foods, so like cake, cheese, wine, bread, were causing me problems. And so I gave them up for a while,
Mhm.
most disappointed in that. But we then moved to India, for,
Okay.
as you do, for 3 years with my husband's work. And whilst I was out there, I wasn't working. So at the time, I'd been working in intensive care as a nurse, and I wasn't working out there. So I decided to study nutrition in order to really understand more about what was going on with these food intolerances, but with the ultimate goal that I could drink wine again. No, it was pretty shallow.
Right, right.
And whilst I was out there, I got invited to a day's workshop about dairy-free eating. And I met this most incredible doctor who was teaching people about using food as medicine and by eating a whole food plant-based diet.
Mm.
And what she was saying was really interesting. And obviously, I was really that the whole food health connection was beginning to fascinate me.
Mm.
But the most outstanding thing for me was her. She just oozed all this energy and this sort of really shone. And I just thought, okay, that's what I want. I want some of that.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I started going to some of her other workshops and then changed to a plant-based diet whilst I was out living in India. And that's essentially how my business or my alter ego, if you like, the Sensitive Foodie
sure.
was created, because I also then started writing about it and creating recipes.
It's kind of like a natural documentation process for you. Like as you became plant based, like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna document this as I go along.
Yeah, absolutely. And it started off by cake recipes and then, basically whatever I was creating, I'd then put it up on the blog, and it's just kind of developed from there really.
Well, I guess what followed from there? So you started to create the sensitive foodie, you started documenting the recipes, and obviously living in India, that must have been kind of like an interesting experience. India, I mean, in general, is pretty kind of like more on the plant-based, more vegetarian side leaning, at least in certain regions, from what I understand. So that may or
Mm.
may not have been helpful as well.
Well, we were living in South India, which is they have more vegetarian food. And when you eat out, it's either labeled veg or non-veg.
Okay.
So it does make things a little bit simpler. Veg doesn't mean vegan though, so they use paneer quite a bit in things. But what was interesting for me is I got to know some people locally, and they always
Mm,
were inviting me around for lunch, and
mm,
which was great. And they'd just serve these amazingly simple plant-based dishes, just naturally.
mm.
They weren't necessarily vegan, but these were just like the local foods that they'd eat at lunchtime. They'd always apologize for it being so simple. I'm like, oh my God, this is some of the best food I've ever tasted. Because it had the color and the texture and
Yeah.
just really simple ingredients just put together beautifully.
Well,
And so
there's
that
kind of
was
like
amazing.
there's this stigma that like eating like whole food plant-based meals is boring, like not maybe
I
not
know.
as delicious, right?
Yeah. Oh, I know. And it's so not true. And one of the things now that I love when I'm teaching people, I was teaching medical students this morning, and I was saying to them, this isn't an austere, boring way of eating.
Mm,
This is full of these foods are just packed full of flavor and texture. They can be really simple to make as well. They don't have to be expensive. You
mm,
just need to know how to put it together. And then
mm.
once you've started, then you can just adapt and start creating your own flavors and textures that you really enjoy. So it's just getting into it and understanding that it's about enjoyment just as much as anything else.
So you got back from India after 3
hmm
years, and then what happened next?
So I went back to work. I went part-time in intensive care, but I also decided to start teaching people about what I'd been learning. So I started
Mm,
off in my kitchen doing some cooking demos, and then I did some little courses and workshops. I started doing these pop-up supper clubs. So this is still like 2014, 2015, and where I was living at the time, which was near a city called Brighton, which is
mm.
very hot on veganism, and it's just an alternative place. It's lovely.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It reminds
it,
me of
it
Bristol.
they're very similar. It's a very similar vibe. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And but even so, there were some vegetarian restaurants. There's like an award-winning vegetarian and vegan restaurant, but this whole food plant-based kind of thing was still not really that talked about or well known. So I started doing these pop-up supper clubs. So I
Mm,
just cooked these three-course meals. A friend of mine, would host them in her front room, and so it was about getting people to experience the food, and all sorts of people came.
mm,
Not many people knew each other, but they'd just
mm,
come and join together as a group and eat the food. And then I'd come in and talk about it a little bit and explain about, how it was made, or and what benefit it was giving to them.
mm.
Yeah, so just all those mixtures of things, and then it just kind of expanded into courses and things. So,
Well, I mean, talk to me about the impact on your health because you obviously you've had some health challenges, health concerns, and you've worked and kind of like done a lot of work with this. I mean, give
mm.
me some background on this.
Yeah, okay. So, holding down two jobs and having teenagers, turned out that was quite a lot.
Yeah, I can only
And
imagine.
yeah, and so things kind of erupted a bit for me in 2015. So I was eating a plant-based diet, but it wasn't necessarily whole food as it might be. But I'd because I'd been in southern India, I was using quite a lot of coconut
Mm,
because using it as a base, particularly for dessert. So
mm,
coconut oil and coconut milk and cream and things like that. So there was
mm.
actually quite a lot of saturated fat in
Makes
my
sense.
diet.
Makes sense.
So the diet was good, but
Yeah.
and then match that with a lot of stress.
Hmm.
And I was also managed to pick up a virus from a patient, so I'd been really poorly. And
Okay.
there's a combination of all sorts of things. It
Sure.
basically
Sure.
I started having issues with one of my eyes, and eventually, a couple of weeks later, I lost the sight of my eye,
Oh my God.
fortunately temporarily.
Okay.
But I got diagnosed with optic neuritis. So this is
Mm,
this inflammation of your optic nerve.
mm,
And we were hoping it was just going to be a one-off, but then started in the other eye. And then I
sure.
started having problems I was saying I'd lost my arm and my leg. So, getting
Mm,
numbness and lack of grip and things. And I had some investigations done, and basically then got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which
okay.
is an autoimmune condition where your the myelin sheath, which is the
Mm,
protective covering over your nerve, starts getting attacked. So my body was recognizing that as a foreigner, essentially, or as an
sure.
invader, and it was
Sure.
trying to break it. It started to break down the sheath, and that then causes these nerve problems. So in my optic nerve, that was causing a problem with my eyesight, and then there was a few other patches which was then causing the problem. The messages just weren't getting to my hand and my leg properly.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so yeah, so even though I was plant-based, because there's lots of other factors
Yep.
involved, I still got this. But it was interesting because the eye pain particularly was a very familiar pain. So this
Mm.
had been brewing for some time.
It was kind of like just coming all out together, especially with
Yeah,
the catalyst of the stress on top of everything.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It was just all too much, basically.
for sure.
So yeah. So that was the end of my nursing career. So I decided to leave nursing,
Okay. Okay.
and focus on the food side of things, because when I'm doing things for myself, I could sort of balance my time and,
Sure. Yeah.
energies and things like that, and give more time to healing myself.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's more of a balanced, like holistic approach, obviously honoring
Mm,
yourself. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest challenges with kind of like modern society is like we'll go into these like high stress environments where it's like you may not even have any underlying, health concerns and it's
mm,
already still kind of like a high load. you add in, maybe a virus or, a pathogen or, an autoimmune condition, it's all of a sudden it's like, well, holy
Mm.
crap. Not
Yeah,
even to mention being a mother and,
yeah.
having other interests outside of family and work.
Yeah, the demands are high, and I
Mhm.
think modern life we just don't get that much opportunity to switch off,
No.
because it's constant, all of this outside messaging, and especially, doom and gloom, and it
Yep.
all just builds up.
Mhm.
And life is challenging, and
Mhm.
self-care is just so important, and yet we either don't have the time or don't feel like we can give the time to that.
What was it that convinced you? What was kind of like that aha moment? Like, you know what? Whole food, plant based eating, whole food, plant based diet. Like, this is the correct path for me. And it probably is the correct path for a lot of people too.
I followed the research.
Just the facts. Just the
Yeah,
facts.
I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
yeah, looked at the research, and for me it was really important that I didn't want to so when you're making changes you really need to know why. I think
Mhm.
it's really important to have this core why. And for me, I didn't want to end up being a granny in the
Mhm.
future that nobody would give the baby to in case I dropped it, basically.
I
So
see. I see.
for me at that point, whilst I wasn't that bad compared to some, a lot of people with MS,
Mhm.
I just
Mhm.
had this fear that was what my future was going to be. And
Mhm.
so I decided I was going to do whatever I could in order to be as well as healthy so I could be a hands-on granny,
Mhm.
essentially.
Mhm. Makes sense.
I'm still not a granny.
It makes sense. But, kind of like having that long term, like health
Yeah.
future. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Because most autoimmune conditions, whilst there are medications to try and reduce disease progression, in some conditions like mine, they're reducing disability as well. This is the main aim of the disease modifying therapies. But there's still that continual decline. And with things like MS, it's interesting. It might change going forward, but in the past, it was kind of like you had 20 years
Mm.
before you'd start this decline into
Right.
progressive MS.
Like a
Whereas
death sentence, kind of.
well,
Yeah.
slowly, yeah. I mean, it certainly in the past was as a big cause of death for a number of people. But
Mhm.
with these new medications, but also with all of this research now on diet and lifestyle,
Mhm.
hopefully going forward, that those figures will change, and they are starting to change, which is really good news.
Well, being that we're both pretty evidence based and obviously we're pretty familiar with the research, I mean, was there one or two or maybe a few kind of like studies or things that kind of like really clarified like the power of plants for you?
So I was already aware of the work of Dr. Neil Barnard and the people at PCRM in the US. So I'd seen how effective a whole food plant-based diet was for long-term health conditions. So,
Mhm.
things like diabetes and heart disease and
Mhm.
hypertension. And they all have this underlying low-grade inflammation, which
Mhm.
is what's underlying in autoimmune diseases as
Yep.
well. But within MS in particular, there was an incredible, it started off with this incredible study, which started in the 50s and it lasted for uh, sort of 34 years, I think he covered these patients.
Mhm.
And it was about saturated fats. That was his starting point. This is Dr. Roy Swank.
Okay.
And what he found was the patients that could go on a low saturated fat diet, and we're talking about 16 grams a day, which actually isn't that low
It's not that
when in
crazy. Yeah.
no. And so at this point, it did still include meat, but it was a lot of other foods as well, obviously. So lots of plant foods in there.
Mhm.
And he had about 150 patients. Half could manage this and half couldn't. And so he
Mhm.
kind of had this compare group. And the people in who managed the low saturated fat after 34 years,
Mhm.
they were still ambulatory, so they were still pretty well.
Mhm.
There was very slight disease progression. So
Mhm.
compared to those that were on a higher saturated fat diet, and out of those who were still alive, they were very disabled and bedbound.
Wow.
So that's really stark. And
That
in today's standards, it's not proper research. So it's
No,
not
of course.
gold star, but it's a
Yeah.
really good starting point.
For
And
sure.
then, yeah,
And either
it's
way, it's still
incredible.
like very kind of like eye-opening just to just
Yeah,
even be aware of that, you know?
yeah.
Maybe it's not the
And then,
perfect study and the gold standard
no,
and it's like, meta-analysis and all that, but it's still like a piece of evidence. It's like a
yeah.
detective, right? Like any evidence is helpful, especially, and I think that you and I can both relate to this, especially for anybody who has autoimmune.
Mm,
Like, I'll take anything. Like, I'll take if somebody said, like, I mean, in my highest moments of desperation, if someone said they're taking apple cider vinegar, I'm like, okay, it worked. All right, I'll check it out at least. You know what
right.
I mean?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, it's really powerful stuff. And also, this is in the time before there was any disease modifying therapies as well. So this is all
Mm,
that these people had. And I think that's also a really important thing to remember. But for MS, when I got my diagnosis, I was really fortunate that there was already an organization called Overcoming MS, which is based on some work done by a guy called Professor George Jelinek, who is now a retired, he used to be emergency room consultant in Australia, who
mm,
has MS. It's in his family. And when he got his diagnosis, having seen how his mum declined and suffered, he
mm,
took the time to look at every bit of research he could find to find the best treatment so that he didn't go the same way.
mm,
And what he found in the various bits of research was about eating a whole food plant-based diet. So it's
mm,
really low in saturated fat. It does include oily fish and seafood if you want, but it's a very low saturated fat diet, but with healthy fats. So
mm,
lots of polyunsaturated fats in nuts and seeds, flaxseed oil, things like that, as well as lots of fresh fruits and vegetables and beans and legumes and
mm.
whole grains.
Yes.
And that way of eating, what the evidence showed was it was the most beneficial to MS. So that's the way he started eating, and that's
Mm,
the information that he started sharing with people. And then going forward, there's lots of different bits of research now on diet. And whilst there's still no defined diet for MS, what the research is showing is that a high quality diet is really important. So that's the most beneficial. And by high quality, what that includes is fresh fruits and vegetables, whole
mm.
grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, healthy fats, and minimal or no saturated fat, or you can't avoid saturated fat because it's in, we need a bit of saturated fat and it's
Mhm,
in, nuts and seeds and things,
mhm,
but low saturated fat, low processed foods, no fast foods. So all of that
mhm,
junk food, the crap that you get on the shelves
mhm,
in the
mhm,
supermarkets,
mhm,
and combined with other lifestyle changes. So exercise and vitamin
mhm,
D and,
mhm,
stress management.
mhm,
So that's away from overcoming MS. So it's separate research. And then finally, there's a ongoing study called Holism, which is out of Australia again, and
mhm,
that's looking at various diet and lifestyle things. But on the diet side, they published a report a couple of years ago, 600 people and filling in their food diaries, and they've checked in on them every 2.5 years. And what they've found is those people with the highest quality diet, so people who are eating whole food plant-based diet and these
mhm.
healthy fats, they actually had at 7.5 years, they had a 50% reduction in the risk of disease progression and disability,
Fi- At,
which is
at
incredible. You know,
50%.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
This is
yeah.
is mind blowing.
Even it, and they found like with relapsing MS, and by taking cold pressed flaxseed oil, which is character building, um, that was showed in relapsing MS a 60% reduction in relapse rates.
Wow.
So it's because it's really calming down this inflammatory response. You're
Mhm,
giving these really powerful omega-3 fatty acids. So it's
mhm.
incredible, and that's just for MS. And
Yeah.
all the different conditions now, they're beginning to look at diet. So whereas before you go to the doctor and you say, oh, should I be eating something or should I? And they're like, oh
Mhm.
no, diet doesn't make any difference.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the big premise behind lifestyle medicine, especially with
Mm,
practitioners like yourself and a lot of plant-based doctors coming out. Some who have been on the show and have shared, like, there's actually a tremendous impact that nutrition, exercise, sunshine, movement, all these different psychology, right, stress
yeah,
management, like they're not these isolated entities that just work in these like silos by themselves. It's like, okay, well, you go to the doctor and doctor's like, all right, well, here's your 10 medications, I'll see you in, a couple months. And it's like, but you didn't change anything to the core behaviors of health, which are
yeah.
nutrition, movement, exercise, all this stuff, right?
Mm,
What I'm curious about, because you mentioned a few kind of like key factors. So you mentioned inflammation. This is, commonly used term, especially when it comes to kind of like chronic health conditions. So we have inflammation. You mentioned the omegas, which I'd love for you to kind of like maybe touch on a little bit more, and then saturated fat. So we kind of like have all these, and then obviously there's kind of like on top of that we have the whole food plant based diet. So are there specific variables in a whole food plant based diet that are kind of like key factors for maybe improving health or restoring health, things that we should be kind of like be aware of when we choose our foods?
yeah. Okay. So one of the key factors is gut health. Okay, so and gut health is absolutely core, or the health of our microbiome as well as our gut lining itself is
Mm,
absolutely core to any condition that has some form of inflammation. So inflammation, it comes from our immune system responding to triggers, trying to deal with problems, trying to keep us safe. And in autoimmune disease, it becomes so overwhelmed and confused. That's when it starts attacking our cells rather than
mm,
so that are a danger. And so 70% of our immune system is found in and around the gut because it's this real barrier between the inside world and the outside world. And it gets exposed to whatever is incoming. So
mm,
not just the food, but also if you smoke, the cigarette smoke, the toxins from that can end up in your gut from
mm,
environmental chemicals, or
mm,
pollutants because you're breathing in. But even when we breathe through our nose, things still end up down there,
mhm, mhm,
and any other chemicals in foods and things like that.
mm,
The modern food system is with these really highly processed foods, just facsimiles really of natural
mm,
products. So we're putting all of these chemicals in there and preservatives and emulsifiers
mhm,
and lots of salt. So salt is also not good for gut health. It's not good for the immune system. Lots of sugar, the same. Lots of
mhm.
saturated fat. So
Right,
all of this
right.
stuff is incoming and
Mhm,
putting our gut and our microbiome, which is this population of microbes that live in just at the top of the large intestine, and it's
mhm,
putting them under a lot of pressure. And the microbiome, the research on that is just increasing all of the
mhm,
time. But it's really, really key to our overall health because we have subcontracted a lot of processes out to the microbiome and to the microbes, including a lot of our genes. So we've got our own set of genes. I was listening to something recently. I can't remember. It was about 20,000 different sets of genes in humans, but I think it was woodlice or something. They've got
okay.
like 32,000. So they've got
Oh my
more
god.
genes than we have.
What
So
the
all of these
This is
really
crazy.
simple
Yeah.
organisms, they got more genes because all the other genetic stuff is all being outsourced to the microbiome,
Okay.
which is constantly working away. So it's really fascinating.
Wow, wow.
If we and those genes are, obviously there's some genes which are beneficial and there's other genes which then trigger disease. So if
Mm,
we're not looking after our microbiome by feeding it properly, which is
mm,
fermentable fiber and polyphenols, which are colorful compounds in fresh fruits and vegetables and other plant foods, then it's essentially starving. The less beneficial bacteria take over, and then they start
mm,
sending inflammatory signals as well. Whereas
mm.
beneficial bacteria, they want it to be a lovely environment. That's, this
Sure.
is their home.
Yeah.
So they start sending signaling, anti-inflammatory signaling, and just saying, okay, immune system, we can start calming down.
Yeah.
Combine that with these anti-inflammatory fats, the omega-3 fatty acids.
Mhm.
Yeah, the gut health is just such a huge topic,
Yeah.
and it
It's
thrives on
immense.
plants.
Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing is that if we give the right food to our gut, we get the right response, aka the bacteria that are beneficial thrive on those foods, like for example, whole food plant-based foods. And
Yeah.
then if I'm understanding you correctly, if we give the incorrect foods, like highly processed foods, maybe lots of like saturated fat, like that supports the unhelpful bacteria.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So a lot of people eating a Western diet, their fiber intake is really low.
Yes.
It's that fermentable fiber or the indigestible fiber is what
Mhm.
the microbiome eats. That
Okay.
ferments it. Okay.
Right.
And also when you're eating a lot of meat,
Mhm.
obviously there's no fiber in there, so it slows everything down in the gut. So it slows peristalsis down,
Mhm.
and it starts releasing quite a lot of different inflammatory compounds and also bacteria and other microbes that haven't been killed through
Mhm.
cooking and through going through the stomach, because a lot of people are taking PPIs or other antacid medications, so it's changing the pH in the
Okay.
stomach, so it's not actually dealing with, it's not killing off these bacteria as much as it's designed to do. So
Mm.
you're just building up these inflammatory compounds in the gut.
Mhm.
And these microbes, basically, I always look at it saying the bad guys are really tough and they can cling on, and the good guys are a little bit flaky, and they struggle to survive when it's not the correct environment for them. And
Mm.
so when less beneficial bacteria, I don't want to call them bad, because
Mhm.
actually everything has a role in the
Right,
gut.
right.
But when they proliferate, when there's too many of them, then that's then is starting to cause problems, and you get this imbalance in your microbiome. And there's all sorts of factors, that influence that.
Mhm.
Obviously the food that we eat do, but certain medications, if you have to have antibiotics, and
Mhm.
if you need antibiotics, you need
Mhm.
them, they can
Mhm.
be lifesavers.
Mhm.
But a broad spectrum antibiotic that goes through the gut, it
Mhm.
it's going to wipe out a lot
Jeez.
of the beneficial bacteria as well.
Right, so
Um,
many of the colonies. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then in meat, in the way that meat is produced, a lot of animals, and I have to say in the US, I think this is common practice still, because they're so at risk of infections, because they're all close together, they get given antibiotics as a prophylactic, so, as a
Yes.
precaution. And so there's little bits of antibiotic left in that meat. And again,
Mhm.
that then is going to, if you continually eat these foods,
Mhm.
tiny bits start to build up to having a big impact, and then killing off those beneficial bacteria in your gut.
It's all contributing. Yeah, it's all
Yeah,
coming
everything
together.
is. Yeah, it's never
Yeah.
just one thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
because everything is connected.
Well, and I think that's maybe the challenge, especially with, health in general, whether you have, a health challenge or not, it's, well, where's the silver bullet, right? Where's
Mm.
that golden nugget? And I think for a lot of people, especially if you've struggled with something for years, decades, even, your whole life, it's like, I mean, you'll take anything. It's like, you're starving in the desert. I'll take a cracker, right? Like, that looks
Yeah,
amazing, right? Right? Because it's like we're looking for that silver bullet, but it ultimately, I mean, it really is this like holistic puzzle where we have like all these different pieces, and we do have to take ownership, because it's kind of like, well, I mean, the industry is not doing it for us. In fact, I
mm,
mean, if we're being honest, I mean, a lot of the interest of certain companies are actually the opposite of health, right? So it's kind of
yeah,
like, a lot of like self education, a lot of kind of like self knowledge, and a lot of kind of self experimentation, which it sounds like you've done quite a bit, especially with your recipes and kind of like the books and the information that you put out there.
yeah. Yeah, no, I do. And you're absolutely right. I think the other thing is the fact that we expect things to change really quickly.
Mm, mhm,
If this solution could be put in a pill,
mhm.
people would readily take this pill, because that's all they'd need to do.
Sure.
But it does take quite a lot of, determination and
Mhm,
change.
mhm,
But the more that when you start experiencing the benefits, that then helps you to carry on changing and experimenting.
mhm,
And I think the key thing is it takes time. And the reason it takes time, I mean, some people can experience benefits really quite quickly.
mhm, mhm.
Other people really struggle, especially if they've got really bad balance of microbes in their gut,
Mm.
because you suddenly give somebody a load of fermentable fiber,
Yeah.
those microbes are going to have a party, and suddenly you find yourself really, you're all bloated,
Mhm.
you've got terrible wind, nobody wants to come near you because you smell, and that's a real sign that you've got a bad balance of bacteria in your gut. You don't want to just suddenly throw loads and loads of fiber at it, because unless you're going to lock yourself away for a few weeks and and can put yourself through it,
Yeah.
but so that takes time to gradually introduce different foods and gradually build it up.
Mhm.
But also, all of these foods, it takes time for them to have the effect in the body, and our cells are constantly turning over. Some quicker than others. So like in your eyes, around your cornea, the cells turn
Mhm.
over within a couple of days.
Mhm.
Whereas in your bones, your osteoblasts and things, they take years to turn over. But essentially your body is constantly changing. So you today isn't the same you as 5 years ago,
Mhm.
literally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're all new and shiny, but the body uses it with all our cells and our cell membranes. They're just made up of materials that the body's got to use. So
Mhm.
when we're giving it really good quality raw ingredients,
Mhm.
different forms of fats and different types of amino acids and different carbohydrates and minerals and vitamins and all of these
Mhm.
compounds, the
Mhm.
body starts using these healthier ones because that's what's available. So
Mhm.
you see, like, your cell membranes are going to be healthier. The compounds, they're not going to be blocked up with saturated fat, and whatever needs to get into the cell, all the energy gets into the cell, and the mitochondria work properly so that your body
Mhm.
functions better. So that's when you start putting yourself into this healing direction,
Mhm.
and therefore that's when these conditions can start improving. So if I go
Mhm.
back to that research that I
Mhm.
mentioned, this 50% reduction after 7.5 of disease progression after 7.5 years,
Mhm.
that's the impact of eating really good healthy food, whole plant foods, healthy fats.
Mhm.
Down the line it's improving. So that's, I think, is absolutely key. Is It's not, as you say, a silver bullet. It's not something
Sure.
magic.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But your body, it just puts your body into a better frame. And there are conditions where, if you've got some disability, particularly like with MS, or if you've got rheumatoid arthritis and you've got really gnarled,
Mhm.
there are some things which are not really necessarily going to improve. So,
Mhm.
however, it stops things getting worse. And then it also protects you from getting other chronic health conditions, because what we know, that people with autoimmune disease are at an increased risk of other lifestyle or chronic health conditions, say like
Mhm.
diabetes and hypertension, heart disease.
Mhm.
So it helps you to stay well aside from the autoimmune condition as well. So hopefully it's going to put you into a healthier way. It's going to help you to live well,
Mhm.
but also then reduce other conditions, which is really, really important.
It's like a defense mechanism, kind of in a
Mm.
way, where it's kind of like we're slowing down or halting kind of like some of the negative effects, but at the same time, it's like we're putting kind of like a protective layer
Yeah.
also, for other kind of like potential concerns as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And ultimately, because again, with autoimmune disease, there's so many different influencing factors,
Mhm.
it still's no guarantee,
Mhm.
but you just know that for me personally, I know that I'm doing my best
Mhm.
and I'm doing what I can, and I'm living my life to the full and taking the opportunities now. And then so that, hopefully I will stay as well as I am, or but if there is some decline, at least I know that
Yeah.
that I've done what I can, basically, rather than just feeling sorry for myself and thinking that the
Right.
world has it against is against me.
Yeah. Well, it's so easy to just toss in the towel and just
Mm,
be like, all right, well, I guess I'll be on the medications for the rest of my life, or,
Mm,
I'll need to take even more, or,
mm,
it's just kind of like this kind of like destiny based kind of thinking. And
yes.
I guess on the other side, I mean, if we want to broach the other side of this topic, a lot of people will say kind of like, well, what about the oxalates? What about lectins? I mean, what about anti-nutrients in plants? I mean, this is something that I read recently. I'm like, well, this is this is an interesting one that I wasn't even aware of. There's
Mm,
anti-nutrients in plants. It's plants are defending themselves. They don't want to be
mm.
eaten as well. So I mean, we look at the evidence, we look at the facts, and we're looking at kind of like what the research points. I mean, how is it possible to kind of like hold these conversations? Not maybe not conversations. How do we hold space for these kind of topics while still pointing back to the evidence?
Well, I think it is important to discuss these things, and I've got a whole chapter on myth busting in my book,
Mhm,
because there is a lot of information, it's a lot of disinformation, and everything's always rooted in fact, isn't it? So do plants have these compounds? Yes, they do. They are there to protect them from predators. So whether or not it's holding on to nutrients until the time when the plant is going to grow, or to stop the sort of animals eating them. So
mhm.
plants have their own inner wisdom.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that we do in food prep, which actually gets rid of those issues. So if, for example, we say lectins, so lectins are found in pulses,
Mhm.
and they can be toxic. But particularly like
Mhm.
red kidney beans. This is
Yes.
the one that's mostly known about. And if you eat a raw kidney bean, then it will make you really, really sick.
Mhm.
But nobody eats a dried red kidney bean. So, well, not most people don't. Some people do, and then they get sick and they find
Yeah.
out that they couldn't. So, the process of soaking these dried pulses and beans starts to reduce, to open up and get rid of some of these lectins. And then you cook them at high heat. So,
Mhm.
most beans and lentils either need cooking in a pressure cooker or boiled for a long period of time to make them
Mhm.
edible.
Yep.
So, that process gets rid of the lectins. So yeah, never eat a raw kidney bean. It will make you really ill, but cooked kidney beans are absolutely fine.
Mhm.
And so it's about food prep, and it's the same with so for example, people say, "Oh, you shouldn't eat potatoes, and they're a nightshade." Well,
Yes.
okay, so first of all, most people know, if they've been educated about food, is that if a potato is green, you don't eat it because it's got the compounds in it that will make you sick. So yeah, but then you cook it, and then it's fine. You get rid of the green bits, you cook the
Yes.
potato, and it's okay. Nightshades, some people do react to nightshades. There's no getting away from it. But my take on this is, the only figure that I could find was about 10% of people possibly react to either all nightshades or maybe tomatoes or peppers or something. But which means that 90% of people don't.
Mhm.
So, and the nightshade family includes tomatoes, which we know have got really powerful anti-inflammatory phytonutrients in it, like lycopene. Also, it's got lots of vitamin C. Peppers, bell peppers, chili peppers, again, they've got these really healthful compounds in them. Aubergine, oh, sorry, you call it eggplant, don't you? Eggplant, that purple skin, that's got really powerful compounds called anthocyanins, which are known to be really good for brain health.
Mhm.
So they have a lot of benefits to them. So
Mhm.
if 10% of the population in the UK, and I think it's pretty similar in the US, have one or more autoimmune conditions. So if
Mhm.
10% of people are cutting out this whole group of foods, they're missing out on some benefits, a lot of
Mhm.
benefits.
Mhm.
So it's about testing it for yourself and
Mhm.
finding out how you respond to them. If you find you eat fresh tomatoes, and you've got rheumatoid arthritis, and your hands start hurting, then
Mhm.
that's a pretty good indication that something's not right, and therefore it's best to avoid them. But it might be that in a year's time, if you're going through this process and you're healing, if you ate tomatoes again, you might find that you're not responding to them because your gut
Mhm.
is healing as well.
That
So,
makes sense.
so there's a lot of misinformation based on truth, some
Mhm.
truth, So it's about picking out what you want to hear. But
Yeah.
and food poisoning often, I mean, I've read you shouldn't eat lettuce, because of food poisoning, but that's because the polluted water's been used to grow the lettuce, not
Right,
the
right.
lettuce's fault.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like you're
So
tossing. Yeah. No, you're
yeah,
tossing the baby out with the bathwater, basically.
absolutely. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that's where a lot of conversation comes around with fruits and vegetables, where it's like, you shouldn't have so much fruits because of the sugar, or you shouldn't have so much vegetables because of, the pesticides. And it's kind of like,
Mm,
well, it's the same thing again. We're just tossing again the baby out with the bathwater, where it's like,
yeah.
actually, these are probably the healthiest, most nutritious foods on the planet. And yet we're told, like, you shouldn't have so many bananas, right? Or you shouldn't
Mm,
have so much of this, or you shouldn't. But I mean, so, you look on the other side and it's like, we're talking about anti-nutrients, we're talking about kind of like oxalates and lectins, but it's, again, we're majoring in the minors. We're not looking at the whole picture. We're not looking at kind of like, well, there's other benefits here.
mm,
And I'm pretty confident most people aren't eating raw meat, or like meat right off the road or things like that. They're also taking the same kind of like precautionary measures to like cook it and
mm.
prepare it and, make sure it tastes good and things like that.
Well, and more people die from food poisoning from chicken mainly, but from meat than they do from plants. Even cooked rice can be a problem.
Mm,
But yeah, the figures compared to plants with meat, food poisoning for meat, are just there's no comparison. So
yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of when people go to the gym and there's a lot of fear around like lifting heavy weights, right? It's like, oh, I could get injured, right, from it.
Mm,
But statistically, I mean, the numbers are far, far much higher that you will get injured or hurt from not lifting weights, from just like getting
mm,
more brittle and, not exercising. So, yes, there is a small chance that you could get injured. So, the small percentage of people do get injured in the gym, but there's a much, much bigger percentage of getting injured just from
yeah.
not doing anything at all.
But also, you wouldn't advise somebody to go into the gym and just go and pick up, a massive heavy weight, would you? You're building that weight up.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the same with when you're moving to a plant-based diet or a whole food plant-based diet. You're trying things and you're testing, and then you're building up, and your body adapts to foods as well, as do your taste buds.
Hmm.
So, things improve over time, and you
It's like a
can,
progression.
yeah, yeah,
Where
yeah.
you're giving yourself, and what you mentioned earlier, I mean, the body is the most adaptable organism on the planet, and it's like it's
Mm,
incredible to see. At 5 years, it's like you got a brand new body,
yeah.
and at the same time, that was 5 years, right, of
Mm,
adapting, of kind of like basically creating those new processes, for the
mm.
cells and all the metabolic processes as well.
Absolutely. It's like the stuff with oxalates. So
Mhm.
oxalates, there's a concern about them not releasing like calcium, for example. So in leafy
For sure.
greens, they have a high oxalate levels. But what they found is the fact that the body gets used to that, and it finds ways of absorbing it.
Hmm.
So it's not a problem as long as you've got enough vitamin D. It will
Yes.
find a way. And in fact, often they can be more absorbable than calcium found in dairy, for example,
Hmm.
especially when, 75% of the world's population is intolerant to dairy. So it's
Right.
not a good source of calcium for them. So, and with iron, it really goes on about, oh, you need to have heme iron, which is
Mm.
the type of iron that you get from meat, which in itself can be a problem if you have too much of it, because your body actually doesn't get rid of iron. It will store it. So if it's not being used for whatever function it's needed for, it will get stored in the body. And those
Mhm.
stores in themselves, if they get too high, that then starts causing problems and inflammation and can really damage different organs.
Mhm.
Whereas the type of iron that's available in plants, which is non-heme iron, which
Mhm.
of course is where the animals generally get it from in the first place, that is less absorbable. It's absolutely true. There are tricks that you can do to help it be more absorbable, like putting some vitamin C or some acetic acid, say some vinegar on it to help you absorb it, and avoiding caffeine around meals.
Mhm.
Um, but they're now beginning to realize that actually people who are completely plant-based, their body adapts, and actually they are able to absorb more readily,
Mhm.
non-heme iron. So it's not a problem. And the research shows that just as many people who are omnivores are anemic as vegetarians or vegans.
Mhm.
There's no difference.
Mhm.
So it's not a major issue. There's a problem for
That's a
that,
problem in itself, but yes,
yeah,
right.
absolutely. But it's not solely down to the dietary aspect.
Makes It makes sense. Yeah, there's so many factors, and I mean, and just trying to kind of like isolate one and just be like, yes, it's because you're eating a whole food plant-based diet. That's
Mm,
why you're deficient in this, or you have these. It's I mean, one person, like the response that we have to anything, whether it's exercise, nutrition, or health protocols, it's so individual that one person can have a completely different response than another
yeah,
person, right?
yeah,
Because of so many factors.
yeah.
And I think
No,
just
absolutely.
yeah. Well, coming around to your books, well, talk to me a little bit about kind of like what inspired those and kind of like your current mission with your work now.
Okay. Yeah. So I published my first book in 2019. I think I'd always wanted to write a book, and I decided to do it. In some ways, I had been rushing around too much, and it was a way to keep me in one place. And I self-published that book at the time, and it's called Eat Well, Live Well with the Sensitive Foodie,
Mm,
and it's half information about eating a whole food plant-based diet, and then half recipes. So there's a whole selection of recipes, and I get great feedback about my recipes because I'm not a chef at all. I'm a
mm.
self-taught cook. I failed cookery at school, which most people say is impossible. But they were like, please stop. This just don't. So I've taught myself to cook. And one of the problems at school was the fact I didn't follow the rules,
Mm.
which was turned out to be really beneficial because
Yeah,
that's how you make up new recipes.
this is true.
Yeah, yeah. So the recipes I do aren't like really chefy recipes. They are just proper home cooked recipes. And that did really well, even though it was self-published, which is really lovely.
This is great.
I'm still getting people are still buying it even 7 years later. And
Wow.
then the second book I wanted to write about autoimmune disease after when was it 2023
Mm,
at a conference I was at, and some people who worked on a research project in Holland called Plants for Joints.
mhm,
And they'd been looking at how a whole food plant-based diet and lifestyle changes could help people with rheumatoid arthritis and also arthritis.
mhm,
And it was so similar to the results that you get with the Overcoming MS program.
mhm,
And it was just like, the little light bulb moment came on because
mhm,
with autoimmune disease, we're siloed, there's this condition, this condition.
mhm.
And I suddenly thought, well, I wonder what the research says for other conditions. And so decided that's what I wanted to look at. And I had met a publisher by that point, a Hammersmith from Hammersmith Health Books. And she offered me a publishing contract, which was great.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's what I looked at. So again, it's half information. So the first half is all about gut health and autoimmune disease and myth
Mhm,
busting and changes that you can make. And then the second half is all recipes. And again, they're really accessible recipes. They're tasty. And I've made all of them gluten free. So the research about gluten and all autoimmune conditions is not clear. Obviously,
mhm,
there are certain conditions where there's really clear
mhm,
evidence
mhm.
with regards to gluten, particularly like celiac disease.
Yeah, yeah,
But a lot of people with autoimmune disease choose to go gluten free,
mhm.
and often you find a recipe and it's just like, you could try gluten free flour if you want
Yeah,
to. So
right,
I've
right.
made these gluten free by default, so that I know that that they're good recipes. You can also make it with whole wheat flour if you like,
Sure.
but they're properly tested with the gluten free side of things.
Well, being someone who's always on the hunt for good gluten-free recipes now, I'm pretty excited to try these
Mm,
out.
good. And there's
Well,
cake in there.
oh man, you
Cake and
can't go wrong.
dessert.
Very good, very good. Well, if somebody wanted to support your work, follow along, potentially even, learn more, even work with you, what would be kind of like the best way to kind of like get in contact and learn more?
Okay, so well, the first place or the easiest place is probably coming to my website,
Okay.
which is thesensitivefoodie.com. Oh no, it's not. It's thesensitivefoodiekitchen.com.
Okay.
It's a
We'll get the right links in the show
yeah,
notes.
yeah, I know. It's the longest website name in the world. I didn't think about that when I set it up. And on there you'll find lots of recipes anyway
Okay.
and information about my nutrition clinics. I see people online and my cooking classes as well. I do some online cooking classes. The time difference should be okay.
Yeah.
But also you can follow me on Instagram. So I'm at the dot sensitive dot foodie.
Don't worry,
And
we'll get the right link in there.
yeah, yeah, and also on Facebook as well as the Sensitive Foodie. So, and
Beautiful.
then you can buy my book. You can get my book in the US.
Okay, amazing. Amazing.
I think you should be able to get it from any good bookshop, and
Okay.
it's on Amazon as well. So,
Amazing. Amazing.
it is available out there.
Yeah, and your latest book, it just came out, I believe, in the past few months, correct?
Yes, yes. So that was published in January. So my first book is only available on Amazon,
Okay.
but the second book, it was one that will be in the shops. That's the one you can just see behind me there.
Amazing. Amazing.
Healing from the Inside Out.
Healing from the inside out. And for those of you who are interested in it, I've gone through a bit of it myself, and it's definitely a very well written book. And for those of you who will watch this interview on YouTube, again, you can see the copy of it there. And depending on where you're listening, whether it's in the States or Europe, I know we have a few listeners like spread out States,
Mhm.
North America. Yeah, definitely recommend it. And Karen, I guess in terms of kind of like your biggest health lessons, just kind of like doing a quick wrap up. For me, I just can't believe how fast this hour went. I honestly feel like I could talk to you for another like 3 hours. It's been really, really enjoyable. But in terms of your biggest kind of like health lessons, reflections, if you could give someone kind of like maybe one or two lessons that would be helpful for them, just reflecting on your journey, what would that be?
I think the first thing is don't panic.
Okay.
Okay, because a diagnosis of a long-term health condition is very stressful. You go through a grieving process in a lot of ways because your future is not what you expected it to be.
Mhm.
Sorry, there's a low plane coming over.
Okay. It's all good.
So your future is not what you expect it to be. So it's kind of, I think the first thing is to don't panic and to be kind to yourself, to give yourself time. And then the next thing is just to be reassured that there are things that you can do.
Mm.
There are positive lifestyle changes that can make a big difference. And they're all the things that we've mentioned today. So even just eating 5 a day fruit and vegetable is a good place
Simple.
to start. You
Yeah.
don't have to change everything overnight.
Mm.
And to be honest with you, the people who do doesn't last.
Mm.
Okay, because it just doesn't work. It's too complicated.
Mm.
There's just too many changes going on, and you become overwhelmed, and then you stop and say, "That doesn't work for me."
Sure.
Okay, your
Yeah.
body's needs time to adapt.
Mm.
So yeah, so don't panic. Be kind. Go slow. Make some change. Any change. So whether or not it's eating 5 fruits and vegetables a day, it's a good
Mm.
starting point.
Mm.
Changing to some whole grain food instead of white food, getting outside as
Mm.
much as you can, moving your body, taking a moment to breathe and breathe. We don't
Mm.
breathe
Just
particularly well.
no, no,
So
we
take
don't.
those deep breaths is so important. And so little by little, make those changes.
I love that. And kind of like the reoccurring theme that I've heard from you today is, really focusing on consistency over perfection, focus on what's within your control, like, not maybe the external circumstances or things that you're facing, but just like what's in my control? Like what are the
Yeah,
actions, the beliefs, the things that I can do today, to really take ownership of this. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. It could just be
mm,
having, a couple more fruits or vegetables today and just start from there.
yeah, yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Awesome. Well, Karen, it's been a pleasure. I feel very confident that we're going to be speaking again in the near future. And it's just been great to have you on the show today.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Likewise. Well, we'll talk soon. All right. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.